to start the meeting this evening with a pledge of allegiance, and Colonel Austin, would you lead us, sir?
Please rise. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's see. How many new first-timers do we have here? Just 1, 2, 3, 4. A couple more. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and we hope you enjoy yourselves tonight and make yourself a permanent residence here. We're a 501c3. That's a non-profit, which means we don't earn anything. Any money we make is purely for profit. We don't charge admission. We don't have memberships. We don't have dues. We do have a fellow at the back of the room with a World War II helmet. There he is, right back there. Over here, I got you now. Thank you. And if you're so inclined to put a buck or two in there when you leave, that takes care of us for the year. And we have, at the end of the year, we give all our money that we earn raised to veteran causes. And we take our deposit down to zero and start over again. So it's for a good cause. Is everybody on the email list or the postcard list? Do they know how that works? We have an email list we send out prior to each meeting, tells you who's going to be there and all that kind of good stuff. And if you don't have our computer, we also I send out 200 and some postcards every month. And we'd be glad to put you on that postcard list so that you know what's happening. If you want to be on that, just come and see me. I'm not sure who's doing that tonight. I'm a good speaker, and I'm anxious for you to hear. But what I've done, this is the week of the 79th anniversary. Who knows what happened September 1st, 1939? Blitzkrieg, right. I have a short film on the Blitzkrieg, about 6 minutes or so. I like to show that because I had that planned for several months because this is the anniversary of that. But we're going to see that, and then after that, I'll introduce our speaker, and then I'll introduce Chris, who will have some things to say. Thank you.
September 1939. The German foe begins its ruthless march of conquest and sets the stage for World War II. Poland's 34 million inhabitants, crushed, scattered, and enslaved. Tens of thousands of square miles of territory shrink before the movement of lightning armored columns. Poland and the world learn the meaning of a grim new word, Blitzkrieg. Here is shown the initiation of that phase of modern warfare. These pictures of the preparation for attack, and later the actual combat, were all made by German frontline cameramen. Therefore, they stressed Nazi superiority. Success is unimpeded as Hitler's divisions move against outnumbered Polish defenders. Later, on other world battlefronts, the Allies are to destroy the myth of the invincibility of the Nazi armies. But this is Hitler at the peak of his armed might, and the record of a nation overrun in just days is of military as well as historical importance. The spark is set off in the free city of Danzig. Nazi secret agents had long plotted the revolt against law and order. Germany called it liberation. The world knew that Danzig represented the ignition of the European powder keg, the excuse for Hitler's hordes to begin their destructive campaign of conquest. Here's the historic last stand of Danzig's royal defenders. They're entrenched in the city's post office and under repeated fire of Nazi-trained militiamen. Taking cover behind an advancing tank, the attackers move in. Gasoline is sprayed on the building, and its doom is sealed. On September 1st, Danzig is incorporated into the Reich, and all Europe is aflame. World War II is a reality. Nazi regulars move up. The Germans brazenly call it counterattack with pursuit. The civilized world knows it as the unleashing of unheard-of military might. With little to stand in their way, the Nazi divisions roar across the Polish countryside and reveal for the first time the machines and weapons that are to terrorize a freedom-loving people. Military observers see the Nazi lightning warfare as a new style for modern battle. Only a well-devised counterblitz can stem the flanking and pincer movements of the wily Germans. The motorcycles bring up machine gunners for the opening of the attack. Camouflage is used to best advantage, rushing up of troops for more blitz attacks. The German strategy is to isolate Polish forces as quickly as possible. So the Nazi columns move according to prearranged schedule. 30 to 37 miles per day is the German plane. A strategic bridge across the Vistula River had been blown up by retreating Polish soldiers. But in their haste, they were unable to ensure its complete destruction. The enemy will be delayed, but temporary repair is not impossible for skilled mechanics to accomplish in fast time, as Hitler heralded the universe. Arrogant, well-trained, the Nazis marched through Warsaw's streets. The world was permitted to view this display of military pomp and expected to bow before Germany's might. But the events of years following Poland's setback were to tell another story. The Allies are fighting to prove that these blue-stepping legions are not supermen, that the events of September 1939 shall never happen again. The German foe begins its ruthless march to conquest and sets the stage for World War II.
No, that's fine. We want to shut it off. There was only 5 minutes, so I'm looking for Chris. Where is my historian? There he is over there. This is Chris Huffman. He's our in-house PhD in military history, also our historian, and he does a very good job for us in finding speakers and interviewing them. We just went to Blue Ball last week and interviewed our speaker for next week. 2.5 hours, 6 pages of notes. I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
Welcome, everybody. Charlie, thank you for the introduction. Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. Okay, let's start off with Gettysburg. I know I mentioned this before in the last couple of meetings, but I do want to mention it again because it's only like a week from now or so is the World War II and Gettysburg weekend, sponsored by the National Park Service and the Eisenhower Farm over there. As I mentioned before, we've been working with a guy named Dan, who's a National Park Ranger there, coordinating with him. And we shared a number of our previous speakers to help them out, and they're very thankful. And they're encouraging us to encourage you guys to come see their event, which will be September 15th and 16th there in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania at the Eisenhower Farm once again. There are going to be about maybe 10, 11, 12 World War II veterans speaking approximately, and a number of historians will be speaking as well during the event. They will also have a lot of reenactors and different things going on there. Should be a food stand and stuff like that there too. All right, moving along. So I'll introduce our speaker here last, but I want to talk about some other speakers we're going to have upcoming as well first. So we have in October, our speaker, Alan Shapiro, that Charlie just mentioned. We visited him, interviewed him recently. He was in the U.S. Army Air Corps World War II, Alan, and he actually had an interesting experience because he was trained as a fighter pilot, P-40 Warhawk fighter plane, the one you saw in Pearl Harbor at the beginning of the movie where they, on Japanese attack, they were the ones that went up and fought some Japanese fighter planes with Ben Affleck being one of the fighter pilots and all that. Those are P-40 Warhawks. So he trained in that, but he didn't actually get committed to a fighter unit in combat. Then he got trained as a glider pilot, and he didn't go into combat for that either because the mission got canceled shortly before he was supposed to go in, and he didn't do that. Then he got trained as a C-47 transport pilot, and he was doing that for a number of months, and including the Battle of the Bulge and some other campaigns, bringing supplies to U.S. troops that are in the front lines. And he got an interesting story. He got caught behind the lines during the Battle of the Bulge for a day or so, and because of the bad weather, he had to fly out and then had to get all the way back to England along icy runways there. All right, so then we have the November speaker will be a guy named Karl Mann. And if his name sounds German, that's because it is. He's similar to Hermann Pfister we had a few months ago, the speaker who was born and raised in Germany. Hermann Pfister we had just a few months ago. And just like Hermann, Karl as well served in the German, the Jungvolk, means young people. That was the forerunner of the Hitler Jugend or Hitler Youth. And then his family and him came here in 1936. They were immigrants to the United States. And they came here and settled, and then he was later drafted in the U.S. Army, where he went to fight against the Germans in the European theater. And he was in the invasion of southern France, and he moved up through Germany. He witnessed the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp, and he tells us about that as well as some combat experiences. At first, he was a mortar carrying guy for ammunition and stuff like that. He later served as a translator also because of his German language skills. All right, so now let's move to our current speaker, Bill Uyeda. We're happy to have Bill here tonight. He's in his mid-90s here, so it's a treat to have him with us here to talk tonight. Bill's Japanese American, and he grew up in Washington State. He was interned along with his family and relatives in a relocation camp by the U.S. government during the war. That was something that was done. And ironically enough, that was not done in Hawaii, where you would think that because of a large Japanese American population, it would have been most likely done there, and Pearl Harbor was just attacked. But they didn't do that in Hawaii. They did that on the West Coast only, Washington State, Oregon, and California State. And then they put them in a series of camps throughout much of the Western, especially United States. Now, Bill went to college then as a way to get out of the camp. So really the ways to get out of that point of the camps were to go to college, go to the military, or find a job to be relocated to your job as well. So he chose the college route. He got out of the camp, and then he was drafted by the U.S. Army. He was trained as an officer, and he was going to be committed to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which was extremely famous. Senator Daniel Inouye from Hawaii had been a Medal of Honor winner in that unit, and that unit was very highly decorated. A lot of the Medal of Honor guys and other high awards as well. But as fate happened, as things happened, Bill did not actually go to the 442nd there in Italy, but instead he continued his training in Army intelligence and served in the Army of Occupation there in Japan. After the war, he received a degree from MIT in physics, and he worked for RCA developing color TVs and things like that. So now I want to turn it over to our speaker now, Bill. We welcome him, and thank you very much. And without further ado, thank you. And we'll ask Bill as our speaker. Thank you.
Am I on? Okay. It happened in these United States, the international cradle for liberty. During World War II, United States citizens of Japanese ancestry were incarcerated in internment camps. At the same time, thousands of them fought in the United States Army to prove their loyalty and patriotism to the nation of their birth. Under the worst of conditions and against overwhelming odds, the Japanese Americans have persevered and prevailed. Those were trying times for all Japanese Americans. Memories of those years could have made me bitter, but they haven't. I could hold a grudge, but I don't. I've enjoyed a tremendous 95 years of life in the greatest nation in the world. Far beyond my expectations, and probably better than I deserved. I agree with Song I guess I'm too far up. Actually, in Psalm 16:6, we hear these phrases. The lines are drawn unto me in pleasant places. Yea, I have a goodly heritage. My presentation tonight does in no way detract from all of the Americans who closed ranks to defeat the Axis Party in World War II. But that's another story covered by a media icon, Tom Brokaw, in his book, The Greatest Generation. Before I go on, I'd like to acquaint you with 3 Japanese terms. It's not that difficult. Ichi means 1. Ni means 2. San means 3. Hooked up to a synonyms SEI, say, in generations. Issei is a contraction of Ichisei. That's the first generation. Nisei is the children of the Issei, born in America, and they are U.S. citizens. Sansei are actually grandchildren of the Issei and children of the Nisei. Can you say them? Issei, Nisei, Sansei. Boy, you guys are great. You get cum laude certificate for your concept of the U.S. Japanese language. The Issei's were aliens. They had immigrated from Japan. And the Nisei had born in America. The initial arrival, the story of the Nisei begins with the arrival initially from Japan in 1869. About 2,000 were here by 1890. 1,000 per year for the next 10 years, including women. Some were recruited by U.S. business to work our farms and build our infrastructure and railroad lines. The debut from a dubious beginning as immigrants from Japan. They faced formidable challenges, and their destiny was in doubt for nearly 75 years. But unlike European peers, they were denied naturalized citizenship. They could not own real property. They were excluded from organized labor unions because they were considered unsociable and socially unacceptable. In 1907, the U.S. government forced Japan to agree to never issue a passport for common laborers. Those who were already here were allowed to have their families join them. But now the fledgling immigrants found themselves caught between the rock and the hard place. They had to consider assimilating into unwelcome American society. By 1920, there were 100,000 Japanese in the U.S. 20,000 had already returned to Japan. 25% were American-born U.S. citizens. It boggles the mind that the rest opted to stay go for it in the United States. They were willing to endure the demeaning treatment, and they were choosing economic deprivation and enduring backbreaking toil for the sake of their children, hoping against hope that the end they envisioned for themselves when they emigrated to the United States would ultimately be manifested in a better life for their American-born offspring. It was a crapshoot at best, and the odds of them actually attaining their hopes was extremely long. But they did this all for the sake of the children, kodomo no tameni. Nisei upbringing they were brought up on truck farms and in segregated Japan towns or little Tokyos in West Coast cities. They displayed stoic discipline and unbounded parental care for which they had response for devoted filial piety. They were brought up never to dishonor the family name. They were brought up to respect law and authority, and they were brought up to be patriotic American citizens, and also to do well in school. They were gardeners and produce brokers. They were landscapers and chick sexers. Now that's not an ugly word, folks. Some of you farmers know that here in Lancaster County, there were Japanese chick sexers. And their ability to feel the gonads of the chicks, the male chicks were tossed into a bucket of water. That's what happens to men. There were houseboys and there were domestic servants. They ran hotels, bakeries, barber shops, and restaurants and rented buildings. They published bilingual papers. They worked for sawmills, railroads, canneries, and some university graduates had isolated professional practices in law and in dentistry and in medicine, mostly for Japanese clientele. But most university graduates remained unemployed. That can be explained by the fact that the strained U.S.-Japanese diplomatic ties, a strong feeling of an anti-Japanese sentiment persisted along the Pacific coast. They were explaining why they would not be hired, particularly in the defense industry, and certainly during the Great Depression when the jobs were scarce. Most ended up in the family farms and the other labor-intensive occupations. They had adopted a posture of gaman and gambare, endure and hang tough. Hoping against hope that everything would work out in the end. They upheld austere Buddhist philosophies of the parents, giri and om, duty, honor, and responsibility. Shinbo shite seiko suru, success grows from adversity. Their Caucasian neighbors actually saw them as very dependable and very good at their crafts. But organized labor saw that they were an economic threat, and everything had to be done to make sure that they would not enjoy the great American dream. And ultimately, they advocated the Immigration Act of 1924. The Immigration Act of 1924 closed admission to all immigrants who were ineligible to become citizens. This act was later revoked in 1952 by the McCarran Voters Act, which now enabled immigration from Japan and those immigrants to become naturalized citizens. December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, which Roosevelt called a day that will remember in infamy, the lives of all Americans, but the most affected were the Nisei and their immigrant parents from Japan. The Issei, who could not be naturalized citizens, were immediately enemy aliens. Many of their leaders were actually arrested by the FBI because they had been in long surveillance because of the strained diplomatic relation between the U.S. and Japan. Their funds were frozen. They were summarily discharged from their jobs. The Nisei, however, were titled non-aliens, but questionable citizens. Several thousand Nisei draftees before World War II were summarily discharged. My life came to a screeching halt when on December 8th, I was denied boarding a public transit bus by which I had been commuting to the University of Washington. I felt embarrassed and demeaned. At once I was angry and frightened. But most of all, I was disillusioned. But because I had been, for 18 years, taught to be a patriotic American by my parents. The beginning of hostilities created two divergent, paradoxical events. First, the Japanese Americans, along with their parents, would be interned in concentration camps, patrolled by military police on foot and from conning towers. Second, 1/3 of the Nisei population would see active service in both the United States and both in the European theaters and the Pacific theaters of war. I would ultimately end up as an infantry officer assigned to intelligence duty for AFWESPAC, Armed Forces Western Pacific, General Headquarters. But ultimately my 1A selective service classification, which had been downgraded to non-alien, whatever that meant, had to be restored before I could be drafted. In February 1942, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, instructing parents of all Japanese families to register their families for evacuation. That's what people are doing here. The civilian exclusion order was issued by the Western Defense Command in the name of national security, but the record shows that no sabotage or espionage of anyone of Japanese was created by anyone of Japanese ancestry. In the wake of Pearl Harbor, public anger was rampant against all Japanese. Inflammatory attacks by the media in the name of patriotism. It was the in thing for the press to take pot shots at the dirty Japs. One paper headlined a high-level political officer declaring that the only good Jap is a dead Jap. It didn't occur to people that the Japanese in America had nothing to do with the dastardly attack on Pearl Harbor by the imperial forces of Japan. Nor did they recall that 70% of them were United States citizens. What mattered only was that they did one heck of a lot like the enemy. By March of 1942, the first of 100,000 Japanese, immigrants and citizens alike, assembled at designated railroad sidings and bus depots to be transported to some destination unknown. They were carrying only what they could carry. They had disposed of their personal property either by selling them, storing them, or selling them at auctions for pennies on a dollar, and they trusted them to sympathetic Caucasian neighbors who would take care of them. They boarded trains and buses for undisclosed destination. They wore Sunday best with name tags. Included amongst those evacuees were Nisei veterans of past United States wars. It boggles the mind that everything went well. The entire operation was overseen by the Army, but no one was forced to board. In the end, however, the orderly, peaceful compliance of the Nisei and the immigrant families to the evacuation order helped convince the United States government to rescind statutes which had denied immigration and naturalization. I guess there's a guy who's trying to make a statement. No one went directly to the concentration camps. First, they were assembled in temporary quarters in order while the internment camps were being constructed. The Army hastily confiscated state fairgrounds, immigration stations, horse racetracks, and temporary barracks. This is Tanforan racetrack. Immigrants reporting there in their assembly center. This is a Puyallup assembly center. It's a fairground in Washington. It was wet that day. This is also Tanforan. It's amazing that some people were actually quartered in horse stables where possibly man of war, Earl Away, and War Admiral, who were Kentucky Derby winners, may have been quartered. There's an ironic story by one explaining to a complaining children that, you know, good things grow in manure. That's an old stable. Now, I don't mind telling you, that's a one-room apartment. The entire operation was overseen by military police, but not a single person was forced to board the trains or buses. My family and I went from Bellevue, Washington, by train to Pinedale Assembly Center in Fresno, California. And then later to Newell, California, to the Tula Lake Relocation Center, located halfway between Klamath Falls, Oregon, and Reno, Nevada. There were 10 sites in 7 states on desolate desert terrain. You can't believe, when you live in Pennsylvania, that there's so many deserts in this country. And some of you guys know that. There were guarded enclosures behind barbed wires, and each one held 10,000 to 15,000 camps. They were managed by the War Relocation Authority. There were 2 far east, as in Arkansas, and 2 as far south as Arizona. That's not me. Somebody thinks that's me, but it isn't. That was a PR mistake because the government didn't want people to think that there were bayoneted guards watching the whole operation. Conning towers. There are blocks of 12 barracks, multi-tower prepared units, separated by fire breaks. The buildings were covered with tar paper to keep out silt and sand from getting into the building, but a lot of it got in anyway. Each family quarter had an entranceway and 4 top-hinged windows. They were heated by potbelly stoves and lit by drop-cord bulb. Every quarter was about 20 by 20. Every room was furnished with army cots, and army blankets. And you remember those army blankets were very nice blankets. But if you wanted to make a pillow mattress, you could go out and fill bolster-like bags with straw. That may have been the first beginning of Mattress Warehouse. If you wanted amenities like tables, stools, book stands, or even privacy shields, you could build them out of scrap lumber left over from building the barracks. The paradox was that some of these units displayed these flags that you remember we had during those days, both crude and yellow and blue stars, indicating that someone in that unit had someone in the military service or had someone who was a battlefield casualty. Every corner of a 12-unit block was a designated dining room. Meals prepared by evacuated cooks for long quantity, but hardly gourmet. As far as sanitation was concerned, there were communal toilets, shower, laundry, housekeeping equipment. Personal habits were confirmed in less than private circumstances, surroundings. Being evacuated was an unmitigated disaster. The East Bay setback suffered a setback because they had to leave behind everything that they had worked for before World War II. The Nisei faced an uncertain future because the nation of their citizenship was at war with the nation of their parents. They were maligned, even though they had signed an oath of allegiance to the United States as part of the evacuation process. But everyone endured it with a shikataganai. Nothing can be done about it now. They were making best of situations. People were getting married. People were being born. There were funerals, and their grave sites mark probably what's left of all relocation center facilities. There were schools, K through 12, mostly taught by Caucasian civil service teachers. Looks like some hanky-panky started. It looks like a hanky-panky did it. This was a funeral, a very large funeral in Utah, because military police had shot someone because he said they were he was too close to the fence. Cemeteries, grave markers, to die is gain. Accredited Nisei teacher. There's kindergarten, more kindergarten, I think more kindergarten. That's Tula Lake High School in the camp that I was at. There were high school co-eds going to classes. And that, I think, is a class that I taught. somehow all my life I've been considered to be an able teacher. So at the age of 19, I was given classes to teach in English, social studies, and general science. There's graduation, commencement exercises. There was employment. No one was required to work. But everyone would receive nominal pay, $12 a month for spending, and $16 for professionals. There was plenty of work. Agricultural, sugar beet and potato farms. There was office work, administration buildings. That's what you call a modern computer. Some of you may remember using one of these Remington typewriters. That's publishing a local camp newspaper. And that's not me. There are postal clerks. You can see the sign on the left side says buy war bonds. Mail delivery. Firefighters putting out fires. There are people who are finishing camouflage screening nets for the U.S. Army. Well, I personally worked as a hospital supply clerk and assistant teacher. There were activities, churches for all faiths, U.S. centers to host GIs, USO centers to host visiting GIs, sports and calisthenics, music groups of all sorts for the musically talented, and outdoor stage shows, socials, movies, and theaters. Photography, crafts for elderly ladies. Thanksgiving came every year. Toys came every year with it. There was Boy Scouting and Girl Scouting. There was actually orchestras. And would you believe there were Japanese Beatles? Chorus, sports, softball, baseball, volleyball, touch football, exercise in the snow. There's church services for all sects. There's U.S. church and sunrise service. There's USO to entertain visiting servicemen to the camps. There were social dances. You can see the zoot suits, pants. I can still remember that. I can remember them playing a song. Pardon me, boys, is that the Chattanooga choo-choo? I can't sing. They were internee-staffed hospitals. There were registered nurses, physicians, and surgeons. There were dentists, and there were intensive care units. That's a new internee, part of the hanky-panky. In due time, you could choose a viable venture and for relocation. One of them was school was an obvious for a college student. You could be employed or join the military. Once you cleared background check and you were issued travel papers and tickets to your destination by the World Relocation Authority, but for most, it was a gut-wrenching decision. Recent experience of evacuation was clearly in their mind. And there were possibility of relocating to an unfamiliar destination, might even be a hostile destination. Then there's the issue of separation from family. Some may be temporary, but in some cases it could be permanent. It wasn't for everyone. Many spent entire war years in camp. But for me, it was not an option. Relocate as soon as possible. I was not going to languish in the camp, in a relocation center for the duration of the war. I applied to a college in Chicago and I left camp in 1943. I went from Tula Lake to Reno by bus, and the Southern Pacific Railroad, City of San Francisco for Chicago. My destination was the Northern Baptist Seminary dormitory, where we were quartered until we could find permanent housing. Once I was in Chicago, I could become an official sponsor for my family, so they named me there. Guess what? The Selective Service caught up with me, and my non-alien classification was converted back to 1A, and so I was drafted in the Sherman Hotel in downtown Chicago and reported for duty at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. I was immediately transferred to the basic training in Florida in just west of Jacksonville, where replacement for the 442nd Regimental Combat Team was being prepared. But just before that unit was shipped overseas, I was transferred to Fort Snelling, Minnesota, to the Military Intelligence Service Language School. After I was transferred to the MIS Language School in Fort Snelling, Illinois, I was given a battery of tests after I'd been there for a while. And I was transferred to Fort Fort Benning in Georgia, to the infantry officer training school. They didn't know what to do with me, I guess. I'd like to now focus on the American GIs of Japanese ancestry. While over 100,000 Japanese were incarcerated in internment camps, thousands of Nisei infantry was already at war in North Africa. They became the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and 6,000 other people were in the Pacific and secretly assigned to strategic headquarters and tactical assignments. Their training and mission was which started before the war in Presidio of San Francisco, was a military secret for 2 decades after the war. Some people referred to as the Yankee Samurai, and they received commendations. General MacArthur noted that never had an army known so much about the enemy before the actual engagement. General Willoughby, MacArthur's G2 general, surmised that because of the linguists during the war had been shortened by 2 years, saving probably millions more lives. There's the 2 translated interpreters with General Stilwell. I guess you can tell which one was General Stilwell. Purple Heart on the Pacific Theater. I would be remiss if I did not recognize the hundreds of women, Japanese Women's Army Corps members nurses, it turns out that there was one bombardier who after 30 missions in Europe asked to be transferred to the Pacific Theater, where he helped destroy the Japanese infrastructure. These GIs came from plantations and farmers in Hawaii. They were business owners. They were college educated in the U.S., some in Japan. They were physically small, 5 feet, 2 inches tall, weighed 125 pounds reading wet, but their average IQ was several points higher than those required for officers. They were volunteers and draftees from internment camps. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed almost entirely of Japanese Americans, was a JACL initiative. That's Japanese American Citizens League. It was a long shot, but it paid off in spades. The JSL leadership felt it was imperative for the Nisei to seek combat duty if they expected to share in the post-war America. They remembered Haji. Don't bring shame to your family's name. If you go off to war, return if you can, but die if you must. Starting with initial 4,000 troops, infantry, artillery, and meds, plus 13,000 replacements. They fought under their unit logo, Go for Broke. That's on card players, bet it all. They became the most decorated unit of their size in the annals of American military history. That's the 100th Infantry Battalion from Hawaii, the main component of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They participated in 7 major campaigns, including 2 beach landings and 223 days of combat. They penetrated the Nazi Gothic line and rescued the Texas Lost Battalion in the forests of France. They garnered 18,000 battlefield citations, Congressional Medals of Honor, Legions of Merit, Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, 9,000 Purple Hearts, and 7 Presidential Unit citations, more than any other unit. When they came upon the German defenses on the cliffs south of the Bull River Valley, which had stymied 3 Allied brigades, the commandant, who I think was General Mark Clark, directed the Nisei troops to perform a diversionary action on the Western Front. That action actually became a direct assault on what the Nazis thought was an impenetrable fortress up a very steep hill, which was accomplished in 24 hours after receiving orders. In the morning, they surprised the Germans and attacked them, and it was the beginning of the Nazi retreat from Italy. Their rescue of the 280 Texas Lost Battalion members, the 442nd incurred over 800 casualties. That campaign has been recognized in the annals of American history as one of the more successful campaigns. For all of their achievements, and they say, don't talk much about it, there's a characteristic trait in you, which means that they do not talk about things that are real great accomplishments in their personal life. Their ultimate cost lie under white crosses and military cemeteries around the world. 54 are honored at Arlington National Cemetery. That's a visit that you didn't want to have from an officer telling you of the casualty of a member of your family. When the 442nd returned, one of the aides for President Truman said, "It's raining, sir. Let's call the whole thing off." Truman says, "Whatever these guys have gone through, I can stand a little rain." Reports from the battlefield regarding the sacrifices and valor in combat convinced our nation of their patriotism as nothing else could. They augmented decades of Nisei effort, improved Nisei's status from despised, discriminated minority to acceptance as almost full Americans. I am a personal gains from those sacrifices. I was able to attend MIT on the GI Bill. I managed the engineering departments for a major U.S. corporation, something I never dreamed possible before World War II. Here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I have lived for 67 years, I have chaired boards of churches, scouting, PTAs, and I taught school after retirement. I was even asked to run for a political office, but I declined. The smartest thing I ever did. Meritorious success by Nisei combat troops and the peaceful, orderly compliance with evacuation by both the Nisei and the Issei helped repeal restrictive statutes. They legalized immigration again and enabled those pioneer immigrants to become naturalized American citizens. My father actually died as an American. In the White House reception recognizing the four members of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, President Truman declared, "I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to thank you for what you have done for this country. You not only fought the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you won. You made the Constitution stand for everything that what it really means, the well-being of all Americans. Keep up the fight. A bipartisan committee congressional committee. Mind you, this is a bipartisan congressional committee. Found that the wartime incarceration of the Nisei was a grave injustice brought on by race prejudice, war hysteria, and misguided political guidance. Nisei members of Congress, one of them was Senator Inoue from Hawaii, led the fight for redress. And 43 years after the war, the U.S. government officially apologized to Japanese Americans for their wartime incarceration. President Clinton, in a belated ceremony recognizing 20 additional Congressional Medal of Honor designees, made this comment: never has a nation been so well served by those who are so treated. In the face of painful prejudice, they defined America at its very best. In November of 2011, the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor, was bestowed upon 3 military units composed entirely, or almost entirely, of Japanese Americans. There were the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the 100th Infantry Battalion, which was the main component of that unit, and the Military Intelligence Service. After it took a long time coming, after decades of blood, sweat, and tears, it finally came. What was shed was real American blood. What flowed from backs and foreheads was honest sweat from back-breaking labor. And what flowed down cheeks were tears of bitter disappointment. Under the worst of conditions, against overwhelming odds, the Nisei persevered and prevailed. All this without rattling the social infrastructure or performing grandstand acts and mass events. Patiently, they endured internment. They displayed patriotism in combat. They have joined countless other patriots who have advanced the legacy of liberty set forth by the nation's founding fathers. They went for broke. Thank you very much. question?
I'm back here. Hi,
I have to
Indeed,
give
a
you,
very remarkable story. Thank you for sharing it with us. Very good.
okay. If anybody has any questions,
That's why we have questions and answers.
he's gonna have to interpret for me because, my hearing aid just conked out.
And I speak fluent Japanese. Just kidding. One of the things that Bill did when he came to Lancaster, with his degree in physics, he worked on a very new project. It was called color television. So thanks to him, you guys can watch color TV. I told my wife that. I said, hey, the fellow speaking tonight, do you remember back when I won a sales contest in '69 and they delivered our first color television and it didn't work? I said, I have to see it. It's the moon landing. And I insisted on it and they brought it. My wife said, you remember that was in black and white? I said, no, I forgot that. Do we have questions for Bill?
Yes.
Can we go back here? Chris, do you have a microphone? You
I can speak loud enough.
Oh, but you'll help this way because I can't hear back that far.
All right.
I think the most important question, if I could ask you any question, I would ask the question, what are the keys to living as long as you have so far?
Somebody interpret that for me. What did he say?
How do you live to be 95?
How do you live to be 95 years old? What is your secret to live to 95?
Charlie, you need to go talk to him. Speakers are aimed this way.
Oh, okay. He wants to know, what's your secret for living to 95 years of age?
Good food, good wife. I've been very fortunate. I don't know how much longer I'll be around, but I have no secrets. I eat 3 meals a day. I walk every day. In the past year, I've slowed down a lot. Now, some of you people don't know this, but I walk like 60 times around a 2-car garage inside. Now, I can tell you that when you do that, you can learn the numbers on your license plate.
Way back, okay.
I'll take the question. Do you have a question right over here? Go first, right here.
Yeah, I was just wondering how long after the Second World War did you stop seeing so much prejudice against Japanese Americans?
Somebody talk to me. Somebody talk to me, please.
After World War II.
After World War II, how long did it take before you saw the prejudice against Japanese decline?
Well, I don't know. You never recognize prejudice, but I remember that when I first came to Lancaster, someone standing behind me at the post office said, "Oh, don't I know you? You must be the professor at F&M." "No." "Then you must be the surgeon at St. Joe's Hospital." "No." "Oh, you run that laundry on West Vine Street." Well, I don't think, I didn't concentrate too much upon prejudice, but I remember one time going to Mount Gretna, and the guy at the gate wouldn't let me in. And you could tell that he was embarrassed because his face was getting very red. But he said, you're not a member here, you can't get in. Or if I took my children to a local community swimming pool, everybody wanted to see my membership card. Nobody else had to show any membership card. But that's, I haven't experienced that much prejudice here in Lancaster. I just tell people my name is Amos Stoltzfus.
Bill over here, we have a question for you.
Mr. Uyeda, what was it like being a member of the American Army in Japan during the occupation?
What was it like being part of the American Army during the occupation in Japan?
Well, I got to interview people at the war prisoners camp. That's another long story. I remember one time walking to my general headquarters office. I was in general headquarters. My cousin was up there 6 stories above, and I was on the first floor. But some Japanese girls walking in front of me who had never seen a black soldier before. And they were telling each other, even the palms of their hands are black. And, the Japanese were very, they weren't very hostile to me, although I had to interrogate a lot of war crimes suspects who later we had to execute. But it wasn't exactly the most pleasant duty I had, but it's been
We have more
it's
questions?
satisfactory.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Pardon?
I interrupted you, I apologize.
What did you say, Chris?
I said I interrupted you, I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. That's all right. Any other question?
I just feel duty bound. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I want to be here.
Okay. Maybe just here a second. Yeah, just here.
Come on down.
Okay, good.
This is less of a question. I was raised at Knoebels Amusement Park, very similar to Hershey. The owner of the park, all of the people in Knoebels fought in the Pacific. They were taught through propaganda to hate the Japanese. My adopted father, I have 5 fathers, one sitting back here now. He never overcame the prejudice that he had. And he was a victim, like you were a victim of that hate. His nephew adopted an Oriental child. He never accepted the child. So be very careful what you let into your heart. He never overcame. I learned from him. And that is still affecting us today. And it might not be the Japanese this time, but there is a lot of talk about hate. And it might just stay within in your heart.
Thank you for sharing.
Actually, not only have I enjoyed life, but all my children have had successful lives. Actually, 2 of my children are graduated from Princeton University. That's why I'm poor. insurance company in Hawaii, which he helped from going under. They transferred there, and he successfully managed that company for about 20 years. And I have a daughter in Boston, Massachusetts, who is, I think, an executive vice president of an insurance company there. So not only have I, but my children have also enjoyed the results of the war.
Don't forget, I met Leslie, Princeton University School of Architecture. She's a smart, very attractive lady.
Any other question?
Over here.
Culturally, I know the Japanese are a very honorable society. What do you think the difference was where you were ripped from your homes and everything you knew and put in internment camps, but then some other groups of people, and this is probably not going to be a popular question, can be displaced because of a flood or some natural event and put in situations where they have to cohabitate with other people, and it turns into something very ugly and violent? What culturally, what is different?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but
I can't remember what you said. Get the manager Sept. You want to come over here? She's going to come over and say directly to you.
I'm sorry, but my hearing aid went.
I know the Japanese are very honorable people, and they embrace their elderly and that sort of thing. You were ripped out of your family and your home, and you were put in an internment camp. What makes the Japanese so compliant and so... It seems as though you did what you were told to do when other ethnic groups or other countries or other people of other origin, when they're put into adversity, don't act or behave the same way.
I think it's just a character of the people. There were some people who were very upset and angry, but most people were very compliant, as you said. And I was impressed with that myself. Ultimately, when the war broke out, the SS Gripsholm, a Swedish ship, took a whole bunch of them back to Japan. And the camp that I was at, Tula Lake, ultimately became the camp. Well, dissenters were sent there, and some of them went to Japan again. One of the things why some Japanese parents sent their children to Japan to study was because they did not think that their children would have any, be able to make a decent living in America. So they were sent to Japan to study in Japan so that they could handle the language, because that's a very difficult language. You think that I know Japanese, but you know, I can't use those languages anymore. Like, come out and surrender to people who are in the caves or anything like that. But most of my Japanese was learned at ports down in Minnesota. And so, actually, I would like to be able to say that these are languages that I knew, but you know, one of the big difficulties we had when we were growing up is the fact that we could not communicate with our parents. I mean, if you're going to talk to your parents about personal encounters or about, let's say, sex. You couldn't do that because they didn't speak any English. I remember when I first went to school, grade school, one-room schoolhouse. Pardon me, but I peed in my pants because I couldn't understand my teacher. But after that, I became fluent in English, and I could talk to anybody, but my parents couldn't speak any English at all, hardly anyway. There was a real communication gap between my parents and me. Not by desire, but that's the way it was.
Bill, I'm going to say thank you on behalf of the entire group for a very, very special evening. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Not too many of these around. It's rare. You're going to get it. You ready?
There's a bag of cherries.
It's a coffee cup. But on the backside, everybody speaks for our round table.
Oh, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Where's the coffee?
If you want to say hello, now's your chance to say hello, people. Come on down.
No parts.